Good evening, dear friends. I am very glad to welcome you. It so happened that this is the second lecture of the season, although in fact today's lecture opens a cycle of 3 evenings in which we will talk about the spaces of ancient Egypt. Today we are talking about the spaces of amulets, symbols, about how the Egyptians thought about their world and how they captured it in their art. Exactly in a week, we will plunge into the space of ancient Egyptian astronomy, stars, planetary texts, and absolutely amazing things that are not simply perceived by the modern European consciousness. And finally, on the third evening, on another Tuesday, we will talk about the sacred geography of the Nile Valley. We will talk about how the Egyptians thought about their interaction with their city, with their personal god, and how it was reflected not only in hundreds of thousands of monuments, but also in a huge number of sacred and secular texts. Speaking of the symbols and amulets of ancient Egypt, I will probably start with the simplest frame, which I think reflects the impression of the majority. You come to the Egyptian halls of the collection of any museum in the world. This is one of the showcases of the Metropolitan Museum in New York, and you're literally surrounded by a huge number of objects, amulets, talismans, embankments. These are all completely different things. Let's not forget about it. All this is covered with hieroglyphic texts. Sometimes these are such clear scarabs, like these wonderful scarabs of the era of Pharaoh Thutmose III, 15th century BC, and the Metropolitan Museum has a whole showcase. And sometimes these are completely unexpected, complex, syncretic creatures, images of gods. And here, of course, we face the fact that we need a guide to immerse ourselves in this culture. For us, such guides will be texts and archaeological finds, because on the one hand, the world of symbols is a space in which the ancient Egyptians described their world, in which they in fact encrypted not only their message to the descendants, but also their feeling of that grand absolute universe that surrounded them. And here from the very beginning, we will face the fact that on the one hand, the ancient Egyptians described, of course, the surrounding world, the beloved Danil Nil. For a reason they called it a term that is very close to the modern concept of the motherland canoe, literally a tomb. And the Egyptians, by their nature, do not like to leave the Danil Nil Valley. They do not like to leave their home. And this absolutely incredible space, which serves as an obstacle for them from the north and the Mediterranean Sea. In the south, it is limited by the first Danil Nil Rapids, and from the west and from the east, this valley is literally clamped in the clutches of the Libyan and Arabian deserts. This space has been described for many thousands of years with the help of a very specific cultural code. And this cultural code, which in fact consists of symbols, which are just as wonderful elements of the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic letter. They not only contain the idea of Egyptians about how they think about the world, but they are also necessary. Their knowledge is necessary in order to, even at the most superficial level, get closer to the interpretation of the monuments of ancient Egyptian art. Because for all the hours that we have ahead of us today, we will be more and more surprised how multifaceted this art is, how many levels of meaning are embedded in one or another work. And from the very beginning, I will make an important remark that these are the layers of meanings that we know, which are reflected in the preserved sources and which we can operate with. Of course, in addition to the written culture, the famous, huge, oral culture, which is always very rich in all civilizations of the East, it has not reached us, and therefore we will only have to guess about many details, contexts and meanings. The sun rises and sets on the horizon. This daily cycle, a small unit of the great annual cycle, is the day of the Egyptian. The Egyptian thought of his world by the fact that at any moment the order of the world, which he called Maat, and in which he lived, may end. At any moment the truth may be defeated by chaos. Then the world will end, but nothing ends completely, because everything will dissolve in the original ocean of chaos, Nun, as it was called in ancient Egyptian texts, in order to be reborn from it later. Looking at the surrounding universe, the Egyptian thought differently than we do, because in our European consciousness, we often think by contradicting some phenomena, describing what we say. This is either one thing or another. We are looking for the exact meaning, describing the phenomenon, trying to cross out the most precise and closest to us idea of the described phenomenon. The Egyptian and all other nations of antiquity think differently. They think not through the union of either, but through the union of and, combining in the description various images, various symbols, various ideas, which can help to describe some amazing phenomenon. The sky is the great waters of the ocean, and the body of the goddess Nun, with her caved stars, which bends over the earth, and the great celestial whole, which rests on 4 pillars, and the great predestined cow, which once jumped out of the great ocean of chaos and carries its son on its horns. For the ancient Egyptian, there is nothing strange in this series of descriptions. The phenomenon, which is not fully recognizable by human consciousness, and the limitation of human consciousness, is described in many Egyptian sacred texts. For the ancient man, it can be expressed only through the unity of the mass of definitions. Each of these definitions becomes such a symbol, naturally, at the approach and rise of the sun, with which we in fact begin our conversation today, rises to a very deep idea, or rather even to the reflection of the ancient man about what life is and what death is. Life is moving. The river becomes a crossing. The river will be associated with death. For the man who has stopped his days on the eastern shore and on the boat will be transported to the west, where the paths to the other world begin. At the end of the day, the great boat of millions of years, the golden and sunny boat, will go beyond the horizon in order to pass at night through the secluded areas of Duat, the other world, in order to once again go beyond the eastern horizon, in order that on the path of life and death a third component will appear, the revival, the very revival, the most incredible dream of the eternal life of the spirit, which in fact permeates the entire ancient Egyptian culture. Let's look at a few images that the ancient Egyptians convey to us from different stages of this giant solar cycle. The 8th century BC, Pope Pius IX Pachacute from the Louvre, the huge body of the goddess of the sky nut, which forms the celestial vault. Below her lies Gepi, her husband and brother, the god of the earth. And between them is the space, in the centre of which we see the sun's boat. The sun goddess, crowned with a disc, floats on this very specific, very ancient boat in its form, and in her hands the sun goddess holds the feather of the ostrich. This is one of the symbols of the god Shu, the god of air. We're talking about the air space that appeared in the universe in the process of creation when Ischaios, the god demiurge, who traditionally has a solar nature in Egypt, created a new universe Before the sun god sits a small female figure, also with an ostrich feather on its head. This is Mat. This is the truth. This is the world order. This is the law. These are the foundation on which the world is based while it's alive, and a sign that her task in this giant universe is to maintain life in her hands. This is the symbol of eternal life, the Ankh, which will appear many times today and which we will talk about separately. Finally, for which we are very grateful to the ancient Egyptian artists, singers, and all the creators of this amazing culture in Egypt, the hieroglyphic text always flows smoothly into the image and vice versa. Therefore, all the actors here are signed, and if you read the Egyptian hieroglyphic letter, then this image begins to speak to you both through the symbol and through the image, and of course through the text, the significant part of which is this huge symbolic picture. And this is also the sun. This is again a 1,000,000-year-old boat, and the ancient artist Aranepha, 13th century BC, on the wall of the tomb in which there is this image, he becomes, in the process of his post-mortem transformation with a bright spirit, which is allowed to be present to the sun god on his boat. But the main thing for him is the rebirth, and as a sign of this, the central position on the great boat of millions of years is occupied by Ben, snow white or bird, or a bird with a pale blue plumage, and one of the species of the heron, which was considered the soul of the sun god, a symbol of the planet Venus, and the literal astronomical name of this bird, Panakadwawia, the morning deity, this very morning star which rises first on the eastern horizon of the sky, signifying the rise of the sun, speaking of the dawn, which for the ancient Egyptian says that life won death again. On the stern of the sun boat is a disc. On the head of Ben is also a solar disc, the great eye of God, which we will talk about separately today. On the nose and in the centre there's such an unexpected complex symbol in which the fiery red knife, the ribbons and the stand are combined. It is literally read Shem, Su, Sputnik, Sputniki. It is about the fact that Arunefer must become one of the companions of the sun god, who, together with the great creator on the pre-eternal fields of another world, will not be in just ignorance, and not to be alone, not to be simply in a good state in another world, but he will be a co-creator. He will, together with the sun god, resist chaos and create the truth. This is also the very sunrise of the sun, and this is also the tomb of Arunefer. And here the sun is not only in the form of a disc, but also in the form of a calf, the very calf that the goddess of heaven gave birth to in the image of a great sacred cow, spilling the birth blood so that it became red, the colour of which the sky was painted at dawn. Two great Perseids, two great sun trees, stand here like the hills of the horizon, like the very border space where the sun comes to Shem, and vice versa, the sun will set in the west. Here, of course, in different eras of the existence of the Cypriot civilization, since we are talking about 4 millennia, one or another image, one or another symbol was either more popular or less popular. But of course, if we are talking about the cult of sacred animals, then we are going into the deep layers of the 4th millennium BC, into the pre-written culture, when a simple Egyptian who lived long before the creation of the pharaohs on the banks of the Nile, and he thought very simply about the images of great sacred animals, which were not gods, but which expressed through some main behavioural principles what the Egyptian thought about this deity. Since ancient times, The great cow, which was associated with the goddess Nebenut and with the great Kador, the great goddess of love, was associated with feeding, with nourishment, with motherhood, with care. I will show you now two absolutely wonderful images. This is the 14th century BC. This is the great Khau-Mahturet, which was found by Howard Carter in Tutankhamun's tomb. It is now a luxury in the Egyptian Museum of Art. It has a special mixture of horns, such lyrical, very beautiful. There's nothing, because this image, which stood in the special chamber of Tutankhamun's tomb, was made so that the spirit of the king, like the sun god, the sun baby, could sit down, grab these horns, sitting on his mother's head, and you see that the golden body of the cow is made of absolutely cosmic black darkness, chaos, which is transmitted by black resin in order for it to jump out again and thus create a new day. The 14th century BC, and this, my friends, is the 32nd to 31st century BC. This is a deep Egyptian archaic. This is before the state of the pharaohs. This is the so-called Gerza palette. The palette is a specific small fragment of the slant from which such a flat thing was made, on which the artist rubbed the paints, which were later used for the ritual. Here the word artist, the word priest, and the word person, and the idea of a person involved in the sacred culture is the same thing. That is, there is an absolute inseparable connection. Amazing. One of the brightest and earliest images of the great cow mother, ears and horns, which end with stars, because this is the great mother of the celestial starry space. And now look, the same image, believe me, between the Gerza palette, between the already known cow from the tomb of Tutankhamun, and between, for example, the monuments of the 1st century of the new era, when this image was still venerated. There are hundreds of thousands of other images, but nevertheless, the core, depending on the context of the era, on the greater or lesser refinement of one or another period of Egyptian history, still contain the same single grain. And this absolutely amazing power of the Egyptian civilization, which allowed, regardless of conquest, historical events, social upheavals, to preserve this core of culture, which was changing, transforming, but nevertheless kept its original essence. And this is also the sunrise. Now we see, in fact, the head of the bottom of the sarcophagus from the 11th century to the new era in the Museum of Gregoriano Ingiccio in the Vatican. This is Ba, the active entity of the deceased person, his embodiment of power, his embodiment of emotions, his embodiment which will fly after death to the afterlife, to another world. We conventionally call the entity Ba a soul, trying to apply the European term to this concept. But in fact, this term, this idea is much more voluminous, more complex, because, for example, in addition to all the parts that we associate with the soul, Ba also embodies, for example, human sexuality, quite unexpectedly. Therefore, here all the concepts are different, and we only adapt them when we use them in our circulation. This, in fact, is also a horizon, because here the hieroglyph is the west. This is the lower left edge of the picture. In the opposite corner to the right, the hieroglyph is the east. And here, between the west and the east, in the centre of this universe, the solar disc rises, inside of which the great solar divine eye, and Ba the dead in triumph, raises the sun above him. Because here the symbolic line says that just as the solar disk on the eastern horizon of the sky, in the same way each dead person will be reborn, and his entity Ba will rise in triumph On the eastern horizon, under the eyes of two figures of the god Anubis, the great lord of the balsam on one side, the great guardian of the necropolis on the other side, and the great lord of the transformation of the entity of the dead from the flesh state to the state of the bright and emanating blinding light of the spirit. Therefore, Anubis here, as you understand, plays a very, very significant role. Let's see through what more direct images the symbol, which will transmit the feeling not only of the rising sun but also of the resurrection of the dead soul, can be transmitted in the monuments of the burial inventory. A wonderful object from the collection of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo and also from the tomb of Tutankhamun. This is a headdress. This is a headdress for the royal mummy, or one of the many headdresses that were in the 14th century before the new era, placed in the tomb of the young king. The headdress is made of ivory, and here you see the figure of the god already known to you, Shu. Together with his sister, the twin goddess, Tifnut, he is depicted again in the form of two lions. The lions, Ruti, Shu, embodying air, and Tifnut, embodying fire moisture, form here a semblance of a horizon in which the sun, and here we have a horizon, the earth, the air space that is formed by the figure of this god. And we must ask ourselves a question: where is the sun disk? The sun disk is the head of the dead, the head of the mummy, which is placed inside this headdress. Here are a few examples. First, the leftmost illustration is a small amulet from the 6th century before the new era depicting Shu, and you see exactly the same pose, but behind his head is a sun disk. Here, this is an image of a deity. In the tomb, the image of Shu was placed very often because the god of air is associated with the idea of breathing. In the deep antiquity, back in the 21st century before the new era, when the famous buried text of sarcophagi, there's a huge chapter in it, the so-called liturgy of Shu, which says that breathing is an important and fundamental part of life. And breathing is something that distinguishes a living creature from a dead or non-living creature. So here, the image of Shu is very important. In the centre above the head, I have shown you a very specific type of amulet, let me call it that, a very important part of the burial inventory of the 1st century before the new era. It is a round object called a hypocephalus, or a hypocephalic bowl. It is a bowl that is placed behind the head of the mummy, has a huge number of ritual images, sunbeds, a great eternal, unrecognisable sun-shaped deity in the centre. It is venerated here by Ba'u and Abed, the souls of the East. These are small pavilions that dance and rejoice when they see the rising sun. The purpose of the hypocephalus is to preserve consciousness, the warmth of consciousness, and the ability to think about the mummy, the deceased. It is clear that the mummy, which remained in the tomb, it will think about a subtle entity that at this moment overcomes the danger of the afterlife and moves towards the great hall of two truths in order to be justified or condemned in the afterlife. But this amazing round object is associated with the sun and the mysterious deities that fill the sun that should be behind the head of the deceased, placed on the hypocephalus. Finally, in this sense, the hypocephalus becomes a symbol of immortality and consciousness. Therefore, in many Egyptian tombs, you will find amulets like the one on the right. These are small amulets made of hematite, a specific stone made of hematite. This object is signed by the deceased as a symbol of immortality. This is the 16th century BC collection of the British Museum in London, and the symbol of this amulet is the preservation of eternal consciousness, the preservation of eternal desire to achieve immortality of the deceased person. Here we face a very important thing. The fact is that there are amulets and symbols that permeate the entire Egyptian culture, and they can be used both for the space of the living and for the space of the deceased. I intend not to use the word deceased because it absolutely contradicts the Egyptian concept of eternal life. Here we are, the deceased in the world of the holy ancestors. The amulet of the head is used only in the funeral ritual, unlike most other symbols that are present in our world and in the world of others. One of the papyruses of the collection of the National Archaeological Museum in Warsaw in the period of the 11th and 10th centuries BC is also the ascent from the sacred mountain of Manu. The solar boat appears, and the goddess Isida and the ruler of Truth Ma'at appear on the bow of the boat in order to proclaim the celebration of the birth of a new day. And here again, the Pavian, the very soul of the East, worships the sun while raising his palms in the position of adoration, just like Bau Imanet, the soul of the West, in the image of the great jackals. The swans run around the necropolis in the west at the moment when the sun descends over the western horizon in order to enter the gates of another world. And here the meaning of the symbol, its inner fullness, will play a greater role for the ancient Egyptian than those basic characteristics that are associated with this symbol in our world. Have you ever seen the green sun? Hardly. And on the papyrus you can see a fragment of the Book of the Dead Ankh of the 11th century by the British Museum. You can see a great hieroglyph of the West with a sun falcon sitting on it, the god of the sun, Racharashta, and a green sun, because green is the colour of eternal life. It was the green that the famous were inscribed on the walls of the burial chambers of the great royal pyramids in the 25th century before the new era. Here you can see the difference between the image and the word is very small. Moreover, in many Egyptian texts, this idea that the text is alive, that it consists of living symbols, is a very common phenomenon. For example, in some ancient texts, an Egyptian will depict a dangerous animal, a snake, a crocodile, a hippopotamus. He, for example, will strip it of its legs or write a sign of a knife as a sign that this dangerous animal is defeated, that it will not cause any harm to the dead. Here, the feeling of the otherworldly reality is absolutely the same as the feeling of the reality of this day. This, of course, was a characteristic feature of the worldview, not only of ancient Egypt, but also of the majority of the great peoples of ancient times. Let's go back to the papyrus of Ankh. On top, there are two winged eyes waving to the sun god with a big Apahal who gives him eternal life. Here, on the sides of the horizon hill, we see the famous baboons of the east, and on both sides the great masters, protectors, two lords of another world. On the left, goddess Neftida, on the right, goddess Isida, are sitting at the gates of another world, raising their hands again in the pose of adoration. And at the very bottom, on the last level, the simplest, there is this small bird with a female head. This is the bat, the soul of that very priest of Ankh. Moreover, the depiction of this entity is given here twice, because the Egyptian depicted the bat as a bird with a human face, as well as an oil lamp that burns. Therefore, on one side there is a lamp and a bird, but in fact the complete holistic depiction of the bat of the priest of Ankh. So that through this depiction on the scroll of the Book of the Dead, it is actually present next to the great rise of the falcon on the horizon of the Great West. Also, the depictions on the sarcophagus, as well as many others that I will show you today, the 4th century BC. This is also a horizon. We see here 2 boats. On one side, there is a golden managet. This is a day boat. On the other side, there is a black managet. This is a sun boat of another world. And here, on one side, on the left, the hieroglyph of the east is on the head of the goddess of the keeper of the horizon, and on the right, the hieroglyph of the west is on the head of another keeper. The sun god is transmitted from the east to the west through this symbolic picture, looking in which direction the sun baby is looking, which is imprinted in the centre of the disc, guarded by the great sacred snakes, the great solar snakes. We see that, in fact, the scene depicts the whole day. This is the image of the day, half of the daily course of the great sun god. Finally, if in the Egyptian culture there were images and symbols that were commonly used, and in one way they were understandable to all ancient Egyptians, then of course there were other symbols, other images that were a part of a highly devoted Jewish culture, and they appear either in the secret rooms of the temples or in the images that are present in the royal tombs. Cairo, the Egyptian Museum. In front of you is one of the coffins that is huge wooden gilded boxes, and there were several of them. One was placed in another. Inside were the sarcophagi and with the royal body. That is, these were constructions that created the likeness of such a multi-layered symbolic world over the mummies of Tutankhamun, which of course originate with Osiris, with not only the great ruler of the afterlife, but also with the deity that all Egyptians throughout the entire Egyptian history associated with immortality. We will now look with you at one fragment of the second ark of Tutankhamun and see the rarest image. In front of you is the deity that the Egyptian texts do not call by name, but name it by the epithet Neb-Erjir, the ruler of all before the limits. Let me remind you that the Egyptian religion is a genotype. That is, it contains inside itself the idea of a single, unrecognizable, pre-eternal creator that in the process of creation of the universe falls apart into myriads of gods. All these gods are in total various manifestations or emanations of a single pre-eternal deity. Here you see a figure that in its form looks like a balsamic body. This is like Osiris, but on the other hand, inside the body of Osiris you see a solar disk. Inside the solar disk there is a bird with a sheep's head. The Egyptian temple texts say that in the centre of every day there is the 6th hour of the night, when the solar deity in another world, in a duet, connects with the body of Osiris into a single pre-eternal deity. The texts say that the sun is the soul of the pre-eternal deity, and the body of Osiris, which is always in another world, is his body. A great pre-eternal secret deity is formed which pushes the creation of a new day cycle, and so every day the universe is supported by this source of the divine power, of the divine creative power, which is hidden in the depths of the secrets of the night. This movement is formed by the Egyptian concept of Nehok, or the infinity of time. The concept of the infinity of time is associated naturally with the movement of the solar deity. And here, for the first time, this is the most ancient known monument of this kind. You see at the feet and at the head of this deity a snake biting its own tail. Ouroboros is the same image of Ouroboros which will later be borrowed by the ancient and later Hermetic thought of the European Middle Ages. Initially, the idea of Ouroboros, of the snake biting its own tail, was associated with Egypt in a completely different way. This is Mechan, this is the great snake of time, infinite, which bites its own tail, a sign that the eternal movement sun is the foundation of the existence of this world. Our world lives in the time of Mechan, in infinity. The other world, the tomb where everything is unchanged, where everything is in eternal peace, resides in the time of Jed, in the time of eternity. This polarity of the two components of the Egyptian worldview is very, very important, because if, for example, we want to make an amulet, today we will talk a lot about amulets. The amulet itself is a body. The text that is the basis of the ritual that is performed over this amulet is the soul of this amulet. When the body and spirit are, it turns out to be an active, living creature, which, according to its structure, is predestined to be similar to, think about how complex things are, despite the first mentions of such complex oldest rituals. This is also the text of the pyramids. That is the middle of the 3rd millennium to the new era. I think that many have asked the question why the soul of the sun has the head of an owl. Here we again dive into the symbolic series of that the language is dead, that there is no complete pronunciation of it. The Egyptians spelled out consonant and semi-consonant sounds, but did not spell out consonants. Oven is bia, just like bar is what we conventionally call the soul. Therefore, here this entity is depicted with the head of Oven to show the knowing person to the knowing person. What entity are we talking about? After all, this is Ba of the eternal God. This is how it looks in triumphal form. This is a very rare image. This is a wall, a huge wall of the burial chamber of the tomb of Queen Tasseroth, who in the 12th century BC proclaimed herself a pharaoh for several years and seized the throne. That is why this image is not in the Valley of Queens, as would be suitable for a royal wife, but in the Valley of Kings, as would be suitable for a royal person. Let's look at this image, a huge neck with the head of Oven, because this is Ba of the eternal God. On top we see the creation of a new cycle. We see the waters of the pre-eternal. We see the first areas of land which diverge like the horizon from the hill, and so that the sun would be born in the new day. In the inner square next to the solar disk, you see the dead Ba, the shadows of the dead, in the form of the Apakala, the image of the shadow of the dead Shuit. And finally, another image of the entity. That is, all the triumphant, reborn, dead glorify the sun, which is represented here in the form of a disc, in the form of a scorpion, the symbol of the morning sun, in the form of a sun baby, and again in the form of a solar disc, in the form that we will see it. Because this is the visible form that the hands of the great Mother of Gods will soon push to the eastern horizon of our sky. This is also the sunrise, my friends, and for some it is depicted in the form of a calf and 2 piercings. Do you remember? For some it is in the form of the birth of a great sacred cow. For some it is in the form of a disc that appears on the horizon, and on the wall of the royal tomb it will be depicted like this. And in the lower register of the 2-headed Sphinx, the great god Akir, the Sphinx keeper of the secrets of the earth, becomes the basis on the back of which the solar disk has been floating for millions of years. The idea of different forms of the solar deity within itself is in fact an idea of time. That inside the cycle, yes, everything is cyclical, but inside the cycle everything changes, everything is transformed, everything takes on a new form in order to reach the point and then start a new movement in a new cycle. The wall of the sanctuary of the sun in the temple of Seti I in Obidos in the 13th century BC. You see here the King Seti, who in the process of daily ritual worships different forms of the solar deity. In the right section of the image, the solar deity with the head of Ovna. We already understand why. In the left part of the image, a very interesting thing. On the one hand, a sitting male figure with a staff of the Uaz dominion in one hand, a symbol of the eternal life of the Ankhs in the other hand. On the chin of this figure is a long ritual beard of hibiscus, which is associated with the deities of another world, with the pre-created states, with the great pre-created mystery of chaos. The same beard is worn by Osiris and the kings who associate with Osiris as a sign that they are undergoing a deathly transformation. Everyone remembers the mask of Tutankhamun, whose long beard of hibiscus is well known to you. Okay, good, we've seen that. On the head is a solar disc. Inside the solar disc is a scorpion. Like a scorpion, the scorpion of the sun will rise in the east. In the zenith, it will reach the form of Ira, the form of the solar disc. By sunset, it will come in the image of Tarsus, the great creator of the god Atum, whose name is translated from the ancient Egyptian language as the completed. The three forms of the sun, which are visible in our world, and the other side of the sun, which are described only in the late and mysterious temple texts. Knowledge of these symbols was actively used in the burial of those people who either had some sacred status or were involved in these deep layers of the Egyptian picture of the world. For example, in the collection of the Archaeological Museum in Liverpool, this wonderful object is kept. This is a patch on the chest of Mooney. You see the holes for stitching, and believe me, he had two huge phoenix wings on both sides. The monument is made of a phoenix because it is made of scorpions, but his head is oval and in a wig in a three-part parade. Because this is an attempt through a symbolic series to depict two most important forms of the sun god, the morning and the secret night, as a sign that being dedicated to the movement of the solar cycle, the symbol of the dead sun will be reborn. It will move in the orbit of the infinite rotation of the sun, which is depicted in the back legs of the scorpion. This circle on the pedestal is the hieroglyphic Shen, infinity, infinite rotation, infinite movement of the waters of life, which opposes death. On the head of the scorpion, of course, is a fragment of the solar disk. And here the scorpion placed on the chest should associate the deceased with Osiris. Just as at 6 o'clock at night the sun god will reunite with the body of Osiris, the god of the pre-eternal, so the phoenix scorpion will lie on the body of the deceased, which will become Osiris. Due to the fact that these symbols give him the impulse of life from the primordial pre-eternal deity, and for someone it is just a strange object in the museum showcase. It is important to understand this. I'll be honest with you, I've been working with ancient Egyptian culture all my life. Sometimes I look at some ritual object from Babylon, and every time I ask myself how many meanings we don't know, because each culture of antiquity has such a fantastic depth. But even what I'm saying today already shows a gigantic number of layers, a symbolic number, and the ideas that ancient Egyptians put into their art. On the upper part of the Mausoleo of the Temple of Kador Ema'at in Deir el Medin, Luxor, Upper Egypt, you see this scorpion again. But look here, the situation is complicated. These are the first centuries BC, when there was still a living Egyptian culture, But at the time when Alexandria flourished, it was concentrated in the south of Egypt, in the Fives and surrounding Fives regions. So a scorpion, Kipri, the morning sun. It has an oval head. We already know why, it's clear. On the top, a rhinoceros feather. On the one hand, the breath of eternal life. On the other, Ma'at, the truth. It's a scorpion that symbolically conveys a divine principle based on life. It's very simple. The same principle is conveyed through the image of Ovna, Ba, the soul of the eternal deity. He has 4 heads because these are the 4 sides of the world in which he looks and the ruler of which he is. He has a rhinoceros feather on his horns again. And the 4 wings of Ovna and Scorpion are not strange at all. They say that this is an omnipresent and everywhere penetrating part of the divine principle. This is the very principle to which, as the Egyptian texts say, the universe is alive, because it's present at the heart of everything. On the one hand, such a large layer of symbols and images which are associated with the solar representations of ancient Egypt. They will all be embedded as in a huge temple image in a certain symbol which a simple Egyptian can wear in a ring, for example, or have as a part of a jewellery. In front of you, of course, is not a simple Egyptian thing. This is a pendant from the tomb of Tutankhamun, a magnificent scorpion made from the Badakhshan lazurite, an insanely expensive lazurite that came from the borders of those lands where Turkmenistan and Afghanistan now lie. It flies, giving birth to the sun of a new day. But here it is also an hieroglyphic rebus, because according to the ancient Egyptian Scorpio, the sun is Ra, 3 sticks, which reflect in the Egyptian hieroglyphic letter a multiple number, and the basket of the kingdom of Neb, Neb Hebru Ra, or a Vladika Satvarianic form, the throne name of Tutankhamun. On the one hand, a symbol, on the other hand, a very personal symbol, which reflects not just the name of the king, but the program, the task that was given to him at the time of enthronement, especially considering, I think that many people in this hall know the Egyptian history, that Tutankhamun came to power after complex religious reforms and was engaged in the restoration of the traditional culture of Egypt. The image of the scorpion, the image of the morning sun, the image of the scorpion became so significant for the ancient Egyptian culture. A fragment of a painted relief from the tomb of Queen Nefertari, beloved wife of Ramses the Great, 13th century BC. Believe me, on the adjacent wall, the goddess Isis leads Nefertari to the feast before the sun god in such an unusual form. Unusual, I say again, for us. For them, the symbolic content will be much more important than the image. In the same way, in Egyptian art, the written name will play a greater role than the portrait similarity with the image. And I'll give you a bad example. There were a lot of them. When they took an older statue, usurped it, cut out their own name without changing their face. Because in this case, the statue that was the object of, for example, the ritual of commemoration, did not serve the one who was depicted, but the one whose name was written on its base. Here, the significance of the word, the significance of the text, the significance of the meaning, it was certainly more understandable and more recited by the ancient Egyptians than the significance of the image. Let's see what kind of scorpions there were. Here, the image of Hipper is the first big symbol that we are talking about today. The scorpion could be big, royal, such wonderful scorpions that were made of soapstone. Steatites were covered with faience glass glaze. For example, the important events of the reign of Pharaoh Menhotep III were celebrated. Luxurious court of the Pharaoh of the Sun, 14th century BC, and such scorpions for courtiers, for example, are issued as a sign of the luxurious lion hunt that came to the court, or a special series of scorpions is issued to commemorate the parents of the great Queen Thea, who was Menhotep III's beloved wife. Here the symbol of the beetle plays a very important role. The word hepper can be literally translated as creating, self-emerging. And when we read the Egyptian texts where the birth of the sun god is described, we can read the phrase, for example, he who came into existence, self-emerging, no one was created before him, but he created his mother. Here everything will be written out. Yes, it's a great temple text. It's not simple. It's about the God of the pre-eternal that appears as a dimmer on the horizon of chaos in the form of the sun god. He came into existence. He came creating this world into our space. What does this scorpion mean? Why did I give such an example in relation to the secular monument? This happened, says this monument, it came into existence. It came from that unproven world into our unproven one. The fact of the royal marriage is great. The fact of the great royal hunt. The fact that, for example, he gave his wife a whole lake that was half the width of the Nile. There was such a famous story about Lake Jaruka, which Menhotep III once gave to his wife for the holiday. He knew how to make a gift, and they lived happily ever after. But I'm giving specific examples to show that it's not necessarily a part of the temple or the pre-eternal culture. A secular monument that proves that such an event took place in the courtyard. And this is a completely different story. This is the scorpion that is placed on the mummy in the area of the heart. It's a heart scorpion, and most often on such a scorpion will be written the 30th verse from the Book of the Dead, which will say, "My heart, my mother's heart, do not testify against me at the funeral trial." There will be a funeral trial ahead. There will be great scales. On one cup of scales will be placed the heart of the deceased, which is a vessel filled with deeds of life and thoughts. But the other one, the ostrich feather of the goddess of hell, and by the proportion of the weight, the gods will judge whether this person is sinful or righteous. Therefore, here the scorpion on the one hand is the sun setting on Osiris, and on the other hand, the omnipotent amulet, which must help the heart with spells, not to resist the good fate, as the Egyptian text will say, not to resist eternal life. The scorpion can be a classic beetle. The scorpion can have a human face. And in fact, here we also have another magical meaning. The face of the scorpion looks at the face of the mummy on which it lies. That is, from the point of view of the Egyptian context of culture, it confirms and confirms a spell that is written on its belly. And finally, almost the same symbolic meaning. This is the image of the heart. This is the 15th century BC, the British Museum. And here is the lower scorpion with a human face. This is the 18th century BC. It is more ancient. What unites these monuments? The colour of the material, that's right. It is greyish green. Here is a combination of the green colour of eternal life, black colour of eternal life and eternal fertility. And these chapters of the Book of the Dead, from the sentence 30b to 29b, which are associated with the heart amulet, they indicate from what stone, what colour should have been made this or that amulet. And here we have taken a small step in understanding that the amulet has not only the form, not only the ritual of the spell power that kind of launches it into the space of this magic power, but also certain conditions of the form, colour, and what should be written on the heart amulet. Here's also the same chapter of the Book of the Dead, which was supposed to help the deceased achieve justification in the afterlife. And here, talking about these wonderful amulets, I mentioned one thing that was given by the word power. The Egyptian magical space is huge. Clement of Alexandria also said that out of the 9 branches of magic that the world is endowed with, 7 belong to Egypt. And it was not white magic, not black magic. It was not evaluated according to the principles that appeared only in the Middle Ages. It was a way of another interaction with the subtle world. The ancient Egyptians called it the word Heka, and the god of magic wore such a name. And there was an idea that, for example, when you read the ritual text over the amulet in the right way, you take the Heka of the text, put it into the amulet, and thus the Heka of the material amulet appears. That is, this is a kind of magical power which, through both a spell and a correctly performed ritual, from the point of view of the ancient Egyptians, makes the object not only alive, and we will talk a lot about this today, but also active, both in this space and in the unknown space where gods, spirits and sacred ancestors dwell. This is also the British Museum, a fragment of the classic famous scroll. This is the Book of the Dead Singers. Annie, Psychostasia, the funeral trial, huge scales. God Anubis with the head of a jackal measures whether the scales are measured correctly. Nearby, on the pedestal, in the left part of the image, you see the soul, the essence of Ani. On the scales on the left side, there's a red pulsating heart. On the right side, there is a feather of the great truth, Mat. Here, under the scales, is the lower figure of the god Shai, the god of good fate, the god of such a happy event in the fate of the ancient Egyptians, which was very necessary at that time. And on top, a black rectangle, is a birthstone. The Egyptian woman, like the whole of Africa, gave birth to a special construction, which was not only called a birthstone, but was considered the earthly personification of the goddess of the Meskenet descendants. Therefore, the head of Meskenet appears from this brick. The brick here symbolizes one very important thing. Everything that was since the moment of birth is weighed, and what was created by this person and conceived with or without the help of the good fate of Shai, which is also present here. Quite an amazing sculpture from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, the end of the 15th century BC. Look at the incredible detail, the talent of the ancient Egyptian animalist. A very voluminous, very tasty beetle made of basalt on a gold-plated base. I'll show it to you in several angles. The head is not the head of a beetle, it's the head of the deceased in the image of a hypera beetle, in the image of the rising sun. And if we look at it from above, it's a beetle. And if we look at the belly, its silhouette resembles the shape of a heart. And there is also a spell from the Book of the Dead, which was supposed to help the deceased at the funeral. Finally, there were quite unexpected variations. Here is the papyrus of the Book of the Dead, the 14th century BC by the British Museum. The same weighing, but look at this absolutely interesting philosophical idea. One cup is the weight of the heart, but the other is itself. The papyrus is called Nebkeni. It's written on the figure of a person being weighed. And this image, as best as possible, is conveyed in the Book of the Dead when a person literally asks the heart, which is in the opposite position to him, not to testify against him, against his good fate at the funeral. If we recall at this point, an important thing that the Book of the Dead has never been called such in ancient Egypt, that the Book of the Dead is a copy of the Arabic Kitab al-Ma'id, the Book of the Dead, and in the original it is Raun Uperet Imheru, the speech of the Exodus at the end of the day. Then this task of the text is of course perfectly visible here. This is not a story about death, this is a story about eternal life. An absolutely amazing amulet. This is also a heart from a ship at the same time. From the British Museum, the end of the 14th century. This is the new era. This is on the one hand a ship, on the other hand a larva that is born from its cocoon. You see this encrusted with a red faience larva that looks into the new world, and on the belly of this cocoon there is a vein. Chapter 29b of the Book of the Dead says that Ben, being the soul of Osiris and Ra, will become a guide for the dead in the new world. He will help him to be reborn. For the one whose companion, whose guiding star is Ben, says the text, he gets complete freedom to think and move both in this world and in the other. Moreover, the very name of this great phoenix, Ben, comes from one root, Suben, to rise from the sun, to ascend. At the same time, Ben, the first hill with ears on which the solar disk is born in the early times. Here, again, this is a very good example that shows how similar the image system of ancient Egyptian culture is, symbolic and written. Without written culture, it is impossible to interpret Egyptian imagery. And now, coming to the end of this small block, this is a small block about the sun god, I will try to briefly explain the things that culture has lived for several thousand years. I show a piece of the wall from the temple of Borgal Khor in Edfu, a famous sanctuary of the energy of Egypt in the first millennium BC. Let's take a look at this image. In fact, everything is clear. The right picture is the rise of the sun. The winged scorpion pushes the solar disk in the hind legs of the hieroglyphs Shen, infinity. You remember this. The left picture is the sunset, the hieroglyph Ahed. There are two hills of the horizon in which the sun sets, and there is a damaged, unfortunately, image of a sunbird, a sun falcon, which holds in its wings also the apocalypse, which gives eternal life. And here I have specially prepared a small surprise to explain that the same thing could be on the temple wall and in the form of amulets can be sewn on a mummy. From the red yashma, the hieroglyph Ahed is sewn on a mummy, 13th century BC. From the winged scorpion, it was sewn on the chest of a mummy, 6th century BC. Moscow was a fair meeting. Below, from the 18th century BC, the hieroglyph Shen is sewn from gold from Sardalia to the British Museum. The same thing permeates everyday life and the highest temple culture. And here is one very important detail worth thinking about. There is no division into one's own and another's within the Egyptian culture. There's absolutely one scheme within which the number of layers of understanding depends on which way the person himself has gone. What did he learn? What did he achieve in understanding these meanings? How much he is involved in the deep foundations of his own national religious magical tradition. The beautiful back of Tutankhamun's ritual chair, made of excellent cedar, is adored by the Cairo Egyptian Museum. He even went to the poster of this lecture. This is Hek. This is the god of millions of years. This is the god of millions of years. This is the god of time. Let's take a closer look at him. He will reveal many of his secrets to us. First, the figure of a man who sits on one knee on the sign of a golden tiger. Drops of gold flow out of the golden tiger. Gold is a symbol of immortality and the flesh of the gods. It is a symbol of immortality. The figure sits, putting his hands aside. He has a solar disc on his head, framed by two snakes, two ureas, which symbolically transmit solar protection. On each urea on the body, there's a sign of Kshen, the sign of infinity, which you already know very well. The deity, on the one hand, is shown here, it is solar, and on the other hand, it is hidden, because he has a beard of hibiscus. He resides both in that and in another world. In the tomb of the king, he is one of the important figures of the ritual of transition from one state to another. On his right hand, he has an angel, a great symbol of eternal life, which we will now talk about subjectively. Next, in his hands he holds long vertical objects. In fact, this is a fibre of an unopened leaf, a phoenix palm. This is when a phoenix palm throws a leaflet. In the Egyptian hieroglyphic writing, this is a sign of Renopet. This is a year. 1 year, the beginning of a new life. Every year the solar disk is framed. A year is a part of the solar cycle. Every year, such a long Renopet rests in the lower right and left corner in a composition of Galavastic, which sits on the sign of Shen. Galavastic is 100,000. God keeps time for 100,000 years of prosperity in infinity. For that, the king, whose names occupy most of the composition. Under the hands of the god of Heka are the names of the king Tutankhamun, the name of his choir, which associates him with the eternal golden falcon, the embodiment of which he is on earth. Therefore, these names are written in rectangles, the lower part of which repeats the facade of the royal palace. This rectangle is called Serech. Only one symbol of Serech can be an amulet, a sign that this is a divine dwelling, and there lives the one who will protect the owners of this amulet. Further, you see a mirrored composition, typical for ancient Egyptian art, and accordingly, two upper vertical stripes of cedar. In the right, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, the ruler of both lands, Nebuchadnezzar, to whom life was given. And in the left composition, the son of Ra, their beloved Tutankhamun, the ruler of southern Heliopolis, and the sign of eternity. In this case, these two vertical lines of the text become one, to whom life is given in eternity, and eternity and infinity in one image, and part of the new world and part of this. And this duality, which is the basis of the Egyptian concept of the activity of the divine principle, and of course the main sign, the sign of eternal life, which should be the goal that Tutankhamun will achieve by identifying himself inside this giant space of time with Osiris. In Egyptian culture, you will find a huge number of images of the sign of Ankh. Interestingly, unlike the representatives of modern subcultures, the ancient Egyptians practically never wore the Ankh on their breasts. There is a single image, quite late, already in the first millennium BC, when priests of aliens by origin, perhaps by ignorance, wear this symbol. This symbol is completely different. It is not directly related to the embankment of the personal space of a person. It is a symbol of the life that fills the whole universe. Let's see what the ancient Egyptian art says about this. Now before us is an image from the Temple of St. Peter in Obadosia, I remind you, 13th century BC. The sun goddess Isis stretches to the nose of the king, a wonderful combination of signs. In the centre is the Ankh, with two sides framed by the staff of Oasis. In the centre is life, with two sides power and might. And the whole universe, it stretches it all, not just to the face of the king, but to his nostrils, because the idea of life is based on the concept of Chai En Ankh, the breath of life. We breathe with you. And here, this life entering through the nostrils inside the body is a great gift of the gods, which is transmitted by this sign. If you pay attention, I have been talking about this sign for some time, and I do not say what it is. We still do not know what the symbol of the Ankh is. There was a large number of hypotheses that it is a part of clothing, that it is a part of a belt, that it is a part of a sandal, that it is a part of some cosmic symbol. Not a single Egyptian text, despite the fact that the image of the Ankh from ancient Egypt has been preserved for millions, does not comment on what it is. In this case, we will leave it as it is until some source is found that will make it clear. Again, another relief, also from Abydos, a very beautiful goddess, Cthulhu Beth Hethepet, the queen of healing and pacification, also the sun goddess, again gives to the standing king, stretches to his nostrils life and dominion. I am interested in another thing here. In one of the hands the king holds the sceptre of Hetheth, the sceptre of the royal magical power, and also the sign of life, because he, receiving life from the goddess, becomes the possessor of this life. And for the universe of Egypt, this is very important, because if we look at the ratio of the king and the whole Egyptian society, we learn one very interesting thing. One of the principles that the Egyptians measure space with, and which will appear a lot in today's lecture, is K, the life force. The king is the one who is in charge of K, of all living beings. He receives the divine breath from another world as a great mediator, and at the same time, through him, all his Kamu, all his people who form the whole of his personality, also receive this life. He receives it, but receiving it, he gives it back. This is a very clear example of the king's mediating role for the one who can read this temple relief. And here, every detail will never be random. It will have its very important role. A fragment of the ceiling of the Kadkor Dendersky temple of the 1st century BC. I am interested in the central figure. Let's look at it. First of all, this is the owl-headed deity, 4 wings, all-pervading deity. It has falcon feathers. Falcon feathers, or shuti in Egyptian culture, were traditionally associated with the hills of the horizon, where the sun rises and sets. I won't talk about the symbolism of the owl anymore, you remember it. But in one hand he holds the symbol of the sail, the hieroglyph of Chai, and on the other hand the symbol of the eternal life of the Ankh. This is the Chai En Ankh, the breath of life which the great divine principle brings to everyone through the heavenly space of the temple in Dendra. And then the first snake is Dikkan. This is a specific kind of constellation. We will talk about it in the next lecture. But here it is, the movement of this eternal breath of life which fills the entire universe with the pre-eternal deity. And even the comment next to it says about the beautiful breath of the south. That is, it is filled with warmth and sun, the breath that flows from the southern limits of Egypt. Life fills with itself all that nature which is so richly represented in the Nile Valley. Let me remind you that in the Roman Empire, Egypt was the main source of life for centuries, and sometimes on the banks of the Nile, 3 crops were harvested per year due to the constant rhythm of the great river, which brought the fertile Nile to the fields. In the temple of Ramses II in Abydos, 13th century BC, these 2 figures are depicted. This is an image of the personification of certain regions of the country, and there were usually 42 of them. And the signs of a certain province, of a certain city, are written on such standards which are above the heads of the figures. For example, the left figure is Kemen Vozmaritsa. This is the great city of god Totogermopol. The personifications of cities and provinces are carried by the victims. The victims are filled with gifts. Here's bread, here's meat, here are pomegranates, figs, grapes. The Bedouins, as they were called, are very fond of watermelons, melons, cucumbers. What hangs from the hands? Symbols of eternal life. This is a triumph of life, a triumph of fullness, a triumph of generosity and abundance. And these figures are necessarily present with a special frieze at the bottom of the temple of these eras as a sign of gratitude to God. Because in fact, when the Tsar, during the temple act, brings a sacrifice to God, he brings God to God. But the fulfillment, the nobility and the message, this is human. This is human gratitude. The victim here is a mechanic who, being with incense burned in the temple, she transmits to the subtle world a certain imprint of prosperity in the earthly world. But completely different things cause the presence of the deity in the cult statue. This is a completely separate conversation. But here, this victim is a kind of adoration to the divine gifts of which the earth is alive. As an Egyptian text would say, the thing is all beautiful, pure, which is alive in God. This is an absolutely canonical phrase, although it is often used in relation to a particular dead person. On the one hand, the Ankh on the temple wall or on the ceiling, and on the other hand, look at what a wonderful work of art. This is a mirror case from the tomb of Tutankhamun. It opens, it is made of wood, covered with gold. It has a very beautiful rebus on the central part of the loop. You can already see here the same thing as in Tutankhamun Nibapura. Yes, on both sides there are two more sacred snake guards. They have a sign of Shen on their bodies. But according to one of the legends, the sun is born in the morning on the horizon on the petals of a sacred water lily. And here it is also a sunrise. The name of Tutankhamun is born in the first hours of the day on a water flower. It appears here, thanks to this name, as the little sun that rules the earth, as a reflection and a son of the great eternal sun that makes its endless cycle in the universe. Unfortunately, I think that many people know that in ancient times the robbers entered the tomb of Tutankhamun twice. They were quickly driven out of there and reprinted the tomb. The mirror was stolen. Apparently it was made of precious metal or gold or electrum. There are many examples of this. Therefore just an empty case. Unfortunately, the mirror did not reach us. Cairo Egyptian Museum. Sometimes the temple space or the palace space becomes an incredible link of symbols for our consciousness. Think of one very important thing. You already have a lot of knowledge that will help you interpret this thing. Imagine a person who's a bearer of culture. No matter where you look, the wall is shouting. It's all readable text. It's very important to understand. It's not just a decoration. These are words imprinted in stone that speak, speak and speak if you can read them. It's a doorway, just a doorway, in the temple of Ramses III Medinet Abu, the 12th century BC. The second picture on the right is clearer. You understand that it's the same thing. The ceiling is the sky. The sacred griffins with epiches fly over it. The floor is the ground. The temple itself is a likeness of the first section of land on which God created the universe. The walls are filled with life. If we look closely, the angel appears here as a living being. He has hands, and he holds signs with his hands. The uaz, the sceptre of power, the basket under it, the neb, all life, all power. For whom? For the one whose name is written between the signs. It says Ramses Hikayunu. It's the name of Ramses III, the sign of his likeness to the sun. His name is surrounded by an oval. It's the elongated sign of Shen, Shenui, cartouche, as we use such a term in Egyptology. On top of the cartouche is a triumphant decoration in the form of a solar disc and two rhinoceros feathers. And under the cartouche is a sign of gold. All life, all power for the little son. Ramses, who rules now, is immortal on this earth. And these are just the layers of meaning that we know and which I have time to tell during the lecture. So here this talking space with you, of course, amazes the imagination. From there, from Medinet to Abu, think about how the colour has been preserved. It's not a restoration, it's the original of the 12th century BC. You go, you raise your head, it's also a doorway, it's literally the adjacent arch. And you see a huge winged solar disc, Chor-Begdetsky, one of the symbols of the Egyptian state. And then again we see hieroglyphic text. It is read from the middle. We know that the Egyptian letter is read in the opposite direction of the moving figures. Here we see, for example, the sign of the goose, Sa, sun, Sa, son of the sun, and the central sign is the wish of life. May the son of the sun, Ramses Hekayun, live long. May the god of good, Usarmatra Miriamun, live long. His throne name, it's all translated, we just won't go into it now. So here is the symbol of life as the beginning of the wish of good, on which nevertheless the concept of decorating this temple space is built. The symbol of life will be associated with the Tsar's name almost everywhere, because the Tsar is the key to the prosperity of this culture. He is a great mediator between the earthly world and the heavenly world. That is why ancient Egypt, for all the centuries of its history, 30 dynasties, was so afraid of illegitimate rulers from a religious and ritual point of view. This, my friends, is the architrave that once stood on top of the columns of the temple of Harur Sebek of Kamumba. You can see huge columns in the background. Several columns fell and the architrave fell with them. This is the 2nd century BC, a rather late temple. Let's see what we see here. At that time, Ptolemy ruled Egypt, the dynasty of the heirs of Alexander the Great. We won't go into their beautiful, very full of symbolism names, but Ptolemy, you already know the cartouche, you know the sign of gold. On both sides of the name sit the rulers of this temple. The falcon-headed Harur, the great master of medicine and surgery, and with the head of a crocodile, the great Sebek, the great ruler of the secret waters. They point to the Tsar's name, the sign of Ankh, which is now the subject of our interest, but on both sides two absolutely beautiful images of Begdetsky's choir. Each falcon sits on the sign of gold. That is, it is incandescent. In it, between its wings, the staff of Oasis, the symbol of power, is hidden. On the power is put on, excuse me for this phrase, infinity. And here is named Bahutia. The Begdetsky choir is written on each sun disk so as not to make a mistake. I don't know why such accuracy, because at the moment of the cult action, the spirit will enter not only into the cult statue, but also into all these images. And everything that is written will be carried out according to the Egyptian ritual. That is, more than 100 times we depict how the Tsar gets eternal life, the better the process of his interaction with life that comes from another world. A few more examples of the Tsar's personal interaction with life. A very beautiful example Think about it, my friends, the 20th century BC, a fragment of the relief from the White Temple of Senusert I in Karnak. Now this slab is kept in the collection of the Cairo Museum. This is Tsar Senusert I, whom we will kiss, an African kiss, a touch of the nose. Receive in your embrace the bird, the great ruler who transforms the forces of the earth, and Mr. Memphis. Next to it is the blessing, the Tsar's name, and many, many generous words about life, indomitability, power, and health. Here in the lower left corner is also written about health. I'm now interested in the unread text. How all the space is filled with these symbols. It simply closes the world of the Tsar and God inside. It becomes a kind of carpet which is read from one side, and from the other side conveys the feeling of what this divine space is filled with, in which the Tsar, as a mediator, becomes a part of the heavenly world. Naturally, the symbol of life was used by ancient Egyptians not only in very significant temple rituals, but also during big holidays. And naturally, amulets were present in everyday rituals. But I will tell you in a few words how an unexpected symbol could appear during a holiday ritual. We are again in Obadosia. This is Uzerhet Ammon, the great parade ship of the god Ammon, on which the cult statue of God was taken out of the temple during the holidays. We are talking about a holiday called Hebnefer Ennet, the wonderful holiday of the valley. The task of this holiday was to move the cult statue of God from Karnak, the eastern bank of the Neon, to the west, to the sanctuary of the Gezer temple, the most sacred of the saints, the Hatshepsut temple. The sanctuary was rocky. It was perceived as the mother goddess's lawn. The cult statue is purified during night rituals in the mother goddess's lawn. This is very fast. Then, the next morning, the cult statue, renewed by life forces, visits the temple of the deceased king and the whole necropolis, and the life that was born in it, purified by the mother goddess's lawn, becomes the gift that God gives to all kings. A very interesting thing, becomes a symbol of the transfer of this life. Here, in front of the mother goddess's lawn, you see a bouquet woven in the form of the sign of Ankh, and such bouquets were put on the neck of the cult statues of the deceased kings as a gift from the god Ammon, a sign that life and immortality are endless. This is a high temple example of the 13th century BC. At the same time, I'm going to show you a quite domestic, cute and intimate example. This is a painting from the tomb of the wizard Uzerhet at the same time. Despite all the damage, just look at the beauty of the lady, a member of his family. She goes to the funeral ceremony. She is a priestess. She has a sister, a ritual rag of the mother goddess. In her hands, a special necklace of Menads, also a ritual one, a necklace of immortality in her hands. And so somehow carelessly a bouquet is put on the elbow in the image of Ankh, which she will bring to the chapel where the names of her relatives are remembered, just as the names of the great kings are remembered by Ammon after visiting Djoser. The 4th millennium BC, my friends, the 32nd to 31st centuries BC, Egypt before the pharaohs, and one of the most amazing monuments of the Egyptian collection of the Metropolitan Museum in New York, a bowl for a ritual bath in the tomb. When water was poured into this bowl, the water passed into the structure of this voluminous Ankh, made of a very thin and soft stone from the slants of Gruvak. And when the water passes through life, life is filled with the sign of K in the form of 2 hands. What is K? We are now moving into the space, This is the life force. This is the power of birth. This is what gives rise to a new generation of living beings. And here, on the one hand, pouring this water and then pouring it on the victim, a living person launches a life force, naming his ancestors. Ancestors in exchange give life to future generations. There is no world of the dead without the living, but there is no world of the living without the dead, because they are not dead but gone, and they constantly interact with this world at the level of symbol, ritual, and such a pious commemoration of their deceased. At one of the sarcophagi of the 11th century BC of the collection of the Egyptian Museum in Turin, this interaction of life and decay is generally perceived as the centre of the world. The great sycamores, the great trees of the Mother of God, symbolically depict the horizon. This is also the rise, my friends. Sitting on trees, human souls rejoice and stretch their hands in a pose of adoration to the sunbeams, and even the sunbeams are shown, which is unexpected for Egyptian art. In the centre, on the banner, is the sign of K. K is a double world, a world of life force, a source of life force of all kinds. K has absolutely all creatures. This is what is at the heart of Egyptian magical practice. And literally, the magic of Kika includes this term. This is the interaction with K, the interaction with life force, and the primordial filling of all objects of the world that surrounds a person. There may be a completely different image of K which you will not immediately recognize. In the Cairo Museum, this wonderful papyrus of the great priestess of Cherubin is kept from the 12th to the 11th century BC. She was a very high-ranking priestess, so on this papyrus, on the scroll, there is something that was usually not allowed to be depicted by ordinary Egyptians. First of all, Ouroboros, again, you see, the status of the person is immediately visible. The sun, and a magnificent sun baby sitting on a pillow in the form of a horizon. That is, this is the sun that is born on the pillow of the horizon into this world, the great god Oka, about whom we will talk now. The soul of the east, the pavilion, glorifies the rise of the sun. Shutefnut, Ruti, Devalva, the horizon in which the sun is born. The black hands of K show that the sun is also a source of life force. And if you thought it was just the sun of Ouroboros, you are deeply mistaken, because it is the head of the great cow filled with the sun. The head that you see below, it is about to give birth to him. This is an image of the dawn, and this is just a few moments before the great Mother of Heaven, in the form of a cow, gives birth to the one who will be the son, the baby, the calf, the sparrow, and all other symbols that convey in their fullness and totality what the human consciousness knows about the sun. Probably the most striking image of K in the art of ancient Egypt. This is the famous statue of K, the life force of King Awi Brachor in the 18th century BC. Cairo Egyptian Museum. He has incredibly encrusted eyes. There is no Photoshop here. Now, this is a truly fantastic image. Once he only lost the paint. He was pale green, the sign of the colour of eternal life. And here is the symbol of K, the symbol of life force in the form of two hands raised to the sky. It is demonstrated here by an Egyptian artist absolutely triumphantly. But here is another interesting thing. K is depicted not only in this way, but also in the form of a hug, when one person hugs another. And when people hug, they share life force. Moreover, the father is K, the son, and the son is Ba, the father. The father is the total life force of the genus, and the son is its development. This is the flying board that cannot live without life force, but life force is meaningless without the continuation of this board's flight. Here, a huge number of ritual texts show how deeply the Egyptians understood the structure of this world. Due to the fact that the whole universe is built on the life force of the Tsar, on K, the Tsar. Sometimes entire temples were built in honour of the Tsar's K, especially if the Tsar glorified himself in a special way and was deified during his lifetime. Everyone recognised this frame. This is a processional colonnade of the Luxor temple, built in the 14th century BC by Amenhotep III. This is not a temple of God, but a monastery, as tourists say. This is the temple of the Tsar's K. It was active once a year, and it relaunched the Tsar's life force, if we can call it this way, with his father, the god Amun. It's a whole temple, and it's not the only one dedicated to the Tsar's K. All the pyramidal temples, all the tombs, they are all dedicated to the Tsar's K. Just like the small tomb at the private tomb, it's dedicated to specific people. The K is also depicted in the ceremonial Tsar's temple compositions on the temple walls. These are actually two pillars inside the White Temple of Senusert I in Karnak. The relief of Senusert I and Ptah, brought to the Cairo Museum from this temple, you've already seen. Here, the Tsar Senusert appears before the god Amun-Ra in various ritual actions. I'm interested in other things here. First, look at the canvas, where it's very difficult, in fact, impossible to separate the sign from the image. Everything is read here. Everything has layers of meaning, although here are the wishes, the names of the gods, the names of the Tsars, all the titles, what exactly the god gives to the Tsar in exchange for ritual actions and so on. I'm interested in the figure with the red frame. It's an image of the Tsar's K. On the banner there are two raised hands, and inside the banner there is a rectangle with the image of the Tsar's palace, which you already know, where the Tsar's name is depicted. At the same time, let's see, the K standard leaves the base of the sign of Shen. The K standard is alive in the hand. It has a trousseau feather of breath and truth. And in the other hand, there's another K standard with the image of the Tsar. This is the vital force behind the figure of the Tsar Senusert when he performs ritual actions in relation to the cult statue of the god Amun. But in the same way, Amun performs ritual actions in relation to the Tsar. That's why on the left illustration, which is also from this temple, you can see the Tsar's name, Serech again. Here he is, Ankh Masut, living by birth. That's the name of the Tsar Senusert I. He is sitting on Serech in the image of a golden falcon, his divine prototype. And the god Amun extends to him the sign of life, strengthened by the staff of Uaz, the great staff of power. And here we begin to talk about the fact that sometimes symbols can be related to each other. Composing several symbols together, the Egyptian shows a more multidimensional wish or reflection of any good deed in relation to the god, to the Tsar subjects and so on. The scepter of Uaz will be a fragment of my story. I'm showing you the most beautiful Uaz. This is Victoria Albert's Museum in London. It was made during the reign of Amenhotep II. It's the 15th century BC. Look at it carefully. Such a ring-shaped base actually gives a very archaic staff of a shepherd. It's a shepherd's staff. It's not just the staff, it's a ritual object from the temple of Setenubti, from the temple of Sethe in Ombos. Sethe has never been perceived in traditional Egyptian culture as a god of evil or some kind of negative connotation with this god. It appeared only in the late 1st century BC. Seth is a great warrior, a great sun's son. He helps the sun in the other world to fight with Apop, the great snake of chaos. But Seth is chaos itself. He is a destructive force, and his destruction is the basis of a new life. Without the destruction of the outdated form, there will be no new life. So of course, in the ritual of the cult of Osiris, Sephia is perceived negatively because he is the killer of Osiris. He is the destroyer of this world. But on the other hand, in his cult centres in Ombos and Kantir in the north of Egypt, Setha is revered as one of the forms of the sun god. He's very angry, very furious, and very active. Here, anger is equal to the activity within the ritual. Therefore, if you look closely at this ritual Uwaz of Sethi from Ombos, he had hands. He was depicted as a living creature. In the upper part of the frame, you see the shoulders covered with bracelets. He had hands, and he had the head of the sacred animal god Sethi, the desert dog Salawa, which is represented here with a long muzzle, eyes and ears. I'll show you a perfect example. The top of such a staff of Uaz is a rare thing. This is a collection of the Museum of Mediterranean Archaeology in Marseille. The animals are perfectly executed here. And look at the ears, how the cheeks are made. The modelling is incredible. A very rare desert dog. It was not always depicted in such detail. Therefore, at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a sea of guesses and hypotheses. Who is depicted by the sacred animal Sethi? Is it a donkey or a tapir? But there were no tapirs in ancient Egypt. This is a specific desert animal which is known by the name Salawa from the Arabic texts. Setha, apart from being a warrior, he embodies a very high courage, power, strength, and among other things, he is very actively associated with male sexual manifestations. It is a very sexual deity. Therefore, the staff of Uaz is not just a stick holding the sign of the angel in its cute hands. These are the staffs in which Sethi appears as a symbol of great power. Let's look at the left frame, the wall of the temple in Kamumba. I'm interested in the register where the sign of the angel is held by hands, standing on the basket of Neb. These are the two Uaz. Look how beautifully the tops are made. It is clear that these are heads. To some extent, the head of Seth on the top staff of Uaz is transmitted in more detail or less detail, but you are now aware of the origins of the symbol. In the collection of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, there is a wonderful coronation group. In the centre is the Pharaoh Ramses III. He is crowned on both sides by Sethi, which you can see very well on the right, and on the left side by Hor. In this case, Hor is associated with the north of Egypt, and Seth is associated with the south of Egypt. This is a heraldic sculptural group. And here we will face for the first time that heraldic symbols in Egyptian art play a big role. Before we leave the history of the staff of Uaz for a while, I will remind you that it is also used in separate contexts. Here is this beautiful relief of the 14th century BC Karnak with the image of the head of the god Amun-Ra next to the head of Titus. He is the ruler of the thrones of both lands, the ruler of heaven. Next is the scepter of power, the ruler, and you see a combination of the staff of Uaz with a pen and ribbons. Uazet, powerful. This is the name of the city of Phiva, the ruler of Phivan, the ruler of Phiva. Thus the symbol can enter the toponym or the anthroponym, that is the name or the name of a person within the Egyptian culture. And the main or heraldic symbol of all Egyptian art, let's go from very complex to a little simpler, is called Shematawi. And this is a combination of two lands. In front of you is the wall of the hypostyle hall, the temple of the god Amun in Karnak, 13th century BC, Ramses the Great during the coronation. Let's see what's next to him. First, he sits kneeling with the scepter of Heket, the scepter of magical power. Let's see what he is sitting on. First of all, the upper hieroglyph is the sky. That is, he becomes the heavenly ruler. In the centre is the trachea, which ends with two lungs. This is another sign that is associated with the breath of Egypt. Around the trachea, with such stiff legs, on the left is the god Thoth, the god of wisdom, the lord of writing, magic, the moon and ritual. On the right is Hur, the primordial ancestor of the Tsarist power. Two tracheae are tied together. In the hands of Thoth, the ibis of the head, Shemai, the lily of Upper Egypt. In the hands of Hur, the falcon of the head, Mehi, the papyrus. The papyrus is the symbol of the delta of Lower Egypt. The lily of Shemai is the symbol of the valley of Upper Egypt. Egypt breeds only when Upper and Lower Egypt are united. Therefore, the Tsar of Upper and Lower Egypt. And it is in this sequence, because the primordial culture of Egypt, it came from the upper at the end of the 4th millennium BC to the lower, to the delta, which together with climate changes from impassable swamps became the habitat of the Nile Valley. As a result, here you also see a very interesting detail. At the bottom of this composition, I will remind you once again, the composition is called Shematawi, the union of two lands. The lily rests on the sign of the made field, and the papyrus grows from the pre-eternal swamp. That is, there's nothing random here. Let's see how the sign of Shematawi can appear in Egyptian art. First, it is always depicted on the side walls, on the side parts of the throne of the Tsar. The famous statue of Tsar Khafra, the 4th dynasty, the 26th century BC, the builder of the second pyramid in Giza. The falcon sits behind the back of the headdress of the Tsar, a divine bird, his heavenly prototype. Like the great Atum, the god of the evening sun, he has the throne of the Minbit, which on both sides protects the lion faces, which are damaged here. And here is Shematawi, the 3rd millennium BC. Think about it, the 26th century, and before that I showed you the 13th. Well, perhaps it is a little more refined there. Nothing has changed symbolically. Trachea, lungs, papyrus, and heraldic lily. The vessel for the ointment oil from the tomb of Tutankhamun, the 14th century BC, on top of the vessel itself, which is simply tied with a very beautiful knot, as it was passed on to the brilliant alabaster and the artist. On the left side, these are all recognizable Shemai, these are lilies. And on the right side of Mehi, these are papyruses, a sign that this is eternal life. Two signs of Ankh, anthropomorphic, and with handles. What do we have here? Skipi and Trios, which you also know. But we have life at the level of this sacrificial pedestal. This is what the pedestals look like for the Egyptian sacrifices from the depth of the 4th millennium BC. This is the basis on which the world is born from the pre-eternal waters, and Egypt is the upper one, and Egypt is the lower one, and it will live like this for hundreds of thousands of years. Renapet, which is a fibre of the phoenix palm, is on the sign of the hieroglyph Golavastic, and Golavastic in turn is on the circle of Shem, and the magnificent mask of the golden goddess of love, which was constantly associated with the cycles of the revival of the Nile Valley, is also present here. The vessel for the ointment oil. This is the universe. This is a huge number of layers of meaning. And in the centre is inscribed with beautiful hieroglyphs the personal and throne name of Tutankhamun, from the tomb of which this object occurs. From there, from Tutankhamun, a very ceremonial aromatic vessel. At the bottom, the sacred golden falcons resting on the sign of gold are buried in the oval, in the cartouche, in the chenouille, the name of Zar-Nebi-Prur. Look how beautiful and voluminous on the left side of the papyrus, on the right side of the lily, and to God Nila, God Happy, tie these reeds around the symbolic vessel which depicts the lungs and trachea. Breathing becomes aromatic. This is the aroma which is the basis of breathing, because the ancient Egyptians were very fond of aromas, and, for example, the famous Ladan or Mirror, Seneca or Antio, as they were called in ancient Egyptian, were associated with divine aromas. So the smell of divine aroma is the basis of the life of Upper and Lower Egypt. It's just a vessel for palace oil, my friends. But again, it's a small universe made of alabaster, gold, richly encrusted, painted. It's all incredibly beautiful. Of course, Cairo is an Egyptian museum and a very triumphant heraldry. I can't miss it. The centre of the Karnak temple in the 15th century BC, His Majesty Menhipera Tutmos III, having conquered half of the world. Egypt then owned the lands from the fourth threshold of Nile to the top of the Euphrates. He built the whole of the annals. Along with His Majesty, he walked all over the distant lands, the Pessits, which were called Chanini. He was wearing leather scrolls because the papyrus was fragile and it captured the actions of His Majesty. As a result, here in Karnak, on the walls of the whole hall were engraved with hieroglyphs copied from the scrolls the stories of the chronicler Chanini, and in the centre were built, having no analogues, two huge heraldry pillars, the front pillar of Lilia and the back pillar of Papyrus. Upper and Lower Egypt were made of granite, and it was engraved on the granite, and in the side planes of these pillars are all decorated with images and several registers. When in their enclosures, the Zar was received by various gods of the Nile Valley. I will now show you a special one and another, because in the centre of Shammai, in the centre of Lilia, there is a painting. You see, a red painting in the central part, a painting of sepals, if I'm not mistaken. It is a work of art, a triumphant, worthy of a Karnak temple, and not having such a monumental, majestic analogue in the history of Egyptian architecture. These are monuments worthy of Karnak, which in ancient times was called Epithesut, the most perfect of places. Not necessarily a colossus, but a useful amulet. Ancient Egyptians considered it useful to have at home. That's why such a wonderful small papyrus sprout, which was called waj, green, was actively used in life. It was very popular. It was also sewn on a mummy. In the centre of the Louvre collection, there is such an amulet. In fact, it's about 2.5 centimetres high. This is a very careful work. And the far left frame is a handle of a parade mirror on the Marhatshuti, the ruler of one of the regions of Egypt. This is a lectrum, so the lectrum disc, which naturally reproduced the shape of the sun, was stolen, unfortunately. This is also a Louvre collection. Now, the Waji symbol on the one hand is a symbol of youth, a symbol of health, a symbol of... It is very difficult in European language to find analogues with an Eastern term. They have such a phrase about the fullness of life. When life beats with a key, it is green, noisy, it is death. Sound and silence are opposed here, and this is all connected with health. Therefore, such a symbol was very much loved in Egypt throughout its history. But it has another meaning, an amazing cult statue of the 15th century BC, the Great Semet, the temple of the Memphis Triad, the goddess who does not know, is at the same time the son-daughter of the plague epidemic, the epizootic of great divine anger. And finally, she is the great mother of medicine. And her priests, Zunu, are great doctors. On the one hand, she embodies the fiercest anger of God and the most terrible anger of the heavenly world. And on the other hand, she holds in her hands the Waj, the papyrus of eternal life. And on the one hand, she infuses the plague, and on the other hand, she infuses life. Primitively, the Waj, which is a female analogue of the Waj, I did not say in vain, was worn only by the lion-headed goddesses, of which there were many, not only Semet. Later it became a quite understandable attribute of many Egyptian goddesses. Therefore here, filled with life, it began to be associated with femininity in this amulet. It is a magnificent amulet from one private collection made with a heart of faience. You understand that the upper part of the frame is the enlarged central part of the amulet. In the centre there is a small sun baby made with the heart of the sun. He sits on his knees and holds the sign of his infancy in his mouth. This is the sun of the new day. Around, in such special nosai as in open sanctuaries, the figures of Semet are worshipped. There are many of them here. It was believed that Semet possessed, in addition to all his other abilities, the great power of Iadet, the angry power of the mother of gods. This power was depicted as a cobra with a lion face. Iadet appears twice a day, in the morning and at noon. In the temples, special rituals were held to appease the great mother of gods, so that Iadet, which punishes people who break the golden age, does not manifest those Iadet that can come to the world. Iadet, imagine, 365 days, the Gregorian calendar, it ascends to ancient Egypt, plus morning and evening. Every day, two great Iadet, Lionhead and Cobra, as they will be today, had to be appeased. But the basis of the cycle of the angry mother of gods is the principle of the year, because she leaves Egypt and returns according to one of the legends. Therefore these angry Iadet were also god chronocrats. Ritual time is calculated. This is a separate, very interesting topic that we will discuss in the next lecture from the sphere of amulets. What is connected with the Great Semet is a very interesting thing. First, I will show you a golden object which is in the right part of the screen. This is Egida and Manet from the collection of the Museum of Mediterranean Archaeology in Marseille. This is an amazing collection that was once unique, owned by Antoine de Claude. It was a personal French doctor, Muhammad Ali, the great Khedive of Egypt in the 19th century. When he left Egypt, he collected a fantastic collection in Marseille. It is considered the second in France after the Egyptian collection of Louvre. What is it? Egida is a term borrowed from ancient Greece. The goddess Ophidia had Egida, which she used in the battle. In Egypt, Egida is a huge necklace that frames the head of a deity. In this case, here's a golden, wonderful image of Semet with a sacred urethra. For the ancient Egyptians, Egida is a short but very vivid expression of the deity's essence and image. Behind it, there is a kind of a counterweight made of a rectangle and a round part. This is called menet. What is it? Initially, a large brooch of either green or blue beads, and then menet was complete. This is a temple necklace in which a priest, as well as ritual rags, beats the beat of the singing of the temple choir. In the rectangular part of Menet, you see Semet. The round part is a flower of a water lily. This is a symbolic image of the goddess's body. The body is Semet, and the round part is the goddess's uterus, from which either a new day is born, like from a flower of a water lily, or a baby, or a young falcon. What's the point? The goddess gets angry. However, at the moment of her anger, she marries her heavenly husband. She gives birth to a baby, and, hinting at her pregnancy with ritual objects during the service, she is appeased, because the mother, bearing a new life in her womb, cannot bear anger. Her anger is transformed into the protection of her baby. On the other hand, when the furious goddess marries her heavenly husband, a great sacred poison comes out of her, which kills all the diseases in her, leaving her alive. Everything is supplemented by each other. Nothing is one-sided or one-sided. That's why such an aegis with hanging birch or green beads is used in the ritual of appeasement of the Mother of Gods. I'm trying to explain some very complex things. The central menad kept in Myers's collection, the College Eton, a stunning collection of Myers General, contains a sea of symbols. Let's see what we have here. The central part on the left is Sekhmet, holding the papyrus. On the right is Mut, her merciful patron, the great royal mother of gods, who on the one hand is the patron and patroness of the queen, and on the other she is the owner of the ritual ovens for the extermination of ritual criminals. The upper part, the upper register, in the centre is Kador's mask, the golden goddess of love. Two cats next to her, absolutely wonderful. In the lower row, the same thing, Kador's mask in the centre and two beautiful cats on both sides of the mask. What does it mean? When the great enraged goddess returns to Egypt, she is pacified. First she becomes a cat, then she turns from a cat into the golden goddess of love. First Sekhmet, then Bastet, then Kador. But here, not only the whole pacification process, cats, like sphinxes, like lions in the Egyptian tradition, are keepers of passages and the gate. The object itself is a gate through which Kador should appear in a merciful form and replace the enraged image of the Mother of Gods. However, the image can be enraged. Quite an amulet, a magnificent golden amulet of the 9th century BC from the Louvre, Mut Sekhmet, such a syncretic goddess. Or just the 6th century BC, on the lower corner, the left side, the image is shown like this. Also Sekhmet, lion head with a sun disk, a certain birth of the goddess from the lotus flower in the lower part to show that the womb is pregnant with the life of the new day. But in the centre she has a very interesting creature. She sits on her knees and holds a pen in front of her. She has a very strange head. She has a snake head. This is Nehebko. This is the god of the secrets of the earth. All who live in the earth obey Nehebko. In the Egyptian symbolic context, it often means an absolutely unrecognisable secret, that which is unknown. That is, the basis of this ritual of transformation of the angry Mother of Gods is on the one hand a great secret. On the other hand, the birth of the new day, well, let's see at least something more merciful and simple. A magnificent amulet in the form of a cat's bast, 2 sacred stones of the goddess Cathor, a sacred turquoise mifkat, and an amethyst, which the Egyptians mined in a very distant mine in Wadi al-Hudi. This is the territory of modern northern Sudan. With deep antiquity, this beautiful amethyst, this beautiful stone of the goddess, was mined and used in jewellery. In the collection of the Walters Museum in the United States, there is such a ceremonial temple golden guide of the goddess. And remember that little faience thing with Nehebko? This object, absolutely the same according to the expressed idea, was temple. Another example, so that you can imagine that the guide and the amethyst are used not only in the cult of Semet, in the collection of the Louvre, Mut, and Cathor, unfortunately, a badly damaged object, which according to the Black Temple bronze was encrusted with various sorts of gold. The object of absolutely delightful quality, but here you see the same thing, but in a different part. In the right part, in the centre of Cathor Mask, you have already recognised it. There are two sacred falcons which stand on the sign of dominion. In the centre, there is a sceptre of Waj, a papyrus of eternal youth, and on both sides it is flanked by the pillars of jade. The pillar of jade is one of the most ancient symbols of the Egyptian culture, which was used in various rituals. In a nutshell, I will tell you about it. And starting from the story of its ancient manifestations, this is the pyramid of Tsar Nechereket in Saqqara, the 27th century BC. Tsar Nechereket, according to the following tradition, was called Djoser, which means a sacred ancestor. During his lifetime, Tsar Nechereket never had this epithet. At 60 metres, the great heavenly ladder rises with 6 steps to the sky, built by Imhotep, a great priest, wise man, astronomer, the first Egyptian architect, who, according to the Egyptian tradition, attributed not only the invention of the calendar at 365 days, but also the foundation of the tradition of Egyptian wisdom. In the Egyptian tradition of the saints, when a priest began to write any text, he dipped the reed kalam into a vessel of water, and the first drop dropped on the ground was a ritual execution of Imhotep's memory. I will now draw your attention not to the pyramid at all, which is captured here during the restoration process, but to the temple, which is on the right in the ruins. Pay attention to the frieze of the jade pillars. What is it? It is a symbol of invulnerability, stability, and permanence. These are the first 3 meanings. If you look, it has 4 such friezes. These are 4 pillars of the sky combined together. This is about the absence of perspective in ancient Egyptian art. There are a few examples. Perspective was not included in ritual art. Another very important aspect of the jade pillar is the spine, the pillar of the god Osiris. Because Osiris is perceived, his body is perceived by the Egyptian earth. The whole of Egypt is the body of Osiris, which is renewed by the Nile waters flowing from one tear of the goddess Isis, who weeps for him. And the pillar of the spine of Osiris is the axis of the inexhaustible existence of the Egyptian earth. Let's look at the pyramid of Djoser again, but not from above, but from below. This is its central shaft, which rests on the plates of the ceiling of the burial chamber. There's a 10-ton tube in the centre. It was raised, there's a passage, there is a burial chamber. But in addition to this, there are passages around the burial chamber where offerings were collected, where members of the royal family were buried. The total length of the passages under the pyramid on the jade pillar is about 7 kilometres. Among these 7 kilometres of passages, there was an amazing beauty, decorated with faience tiles, an underground palace for the king. No need to explain, you perfectly understand what it is. And in this palace, this part of the facade was taken out for preservation to the Cairo Museum. You see the window of another world, which is supported by such amazing jade pillars, which are incredibly beautifully laid with a faience tile, which is blue-green and has a feeling of eternal life. In the tomb of Tutankhamun there are a huge number of jade symbols. Since jade was associated with Osiris, he was laid in the tomb especially willingly. Gold and glass paste, and even the bird itself, the great master of art and crafts, patron of the transforming force of the earth, one of the gods associated with immortality, also holds in his hands a staff that combines in itself oasis and jade, and sometimes Ankh, jade and oasis, here on this wonderful statue, which in the image of a bird shows Amenhotep III, the Turin Museum, Ankh II. And it is so beautiful how jade holds them in his fists, squeezing his traditional staff, one of the halls of the temple of Seti I in Abydos. Part is preserved, part is not. The central scene shows the figure of the true goddess Mat during the worship of the great Abydos triad. Osiris behind his back is placed by Isidda, his wife, and the third figure is the falcon-headed whore, their son. I am interested not only in this scene, but in the fact that the Osiris in this temple is depicted in completely different forms. Look carefully at what the red rectangle will highlight now. This is a huge pillar of jade with eyes crowned with a huge solar crown, a parade necklace on it, and the king himself, a baby in relation to the symbolic image of Osiris, holds jade with his hands so that he stands unwaveringly. The eyes are clearly visible, and in the same way, I will give you an example, a temple example, and an amulet. The crown of Osiris F is also in simplified form on this beautiful amulet of the 4th century BC. And there was even a special action when, during a large holiday, the king and the queen pulled the cables and raised the jade pillar so that he stood in a vertical position. Because here there was an episode with a very popular Egyptian consonant of different words. Just like jade will always be a world of order, a world of chaos. So this is a rise of the pillar, a return of Osiris to power, an interaction with the ancestors, a support of heaven, and a return of heaven to the primordial power, a demonstration that the king is a legitimate heir because only the choir correctly brings back to life his father Osiris, and finally a triumph of the king's renewal of life in connection with the world of heaven. I can give you another 10 symbols of significance that are here. This is one of the very important symbols of the Egyptian tradition, not only for the king, but also for a simple deceased. This is a case for a mummy of a man called Nespa Entere. This case is kept in Brooklyn at the turn of the 10th to 9th century BC. This is his back. He is Osiris. So the pillar of jade, crowned by the sun, replaces his spine, crowned by the sun. Jade is a symbol of Osiris. The disc is a symbol of the sun. This is the same concept of the combination of the sun and Osiris into a single primordial deity at 6 o'clock at night. This is the source of life that is associated with the immortality of a particular person. Let me show you this case. Let's look at the 2nd and 3rd registers. The middle register has the goddess Kifut, the goddess of pure water, with vessels that purify the soul of the deceased. And at the bottom, all framed with different versions of the symbol of Ankh, is the god Nila. What is the connection? Nila is a daily cycle. Nila is an annual cycle. It is also the revival of the Egyptian land and the revival that brings life to a particular deceased. In the centre of this frame is one of the most famous monuments of Egyptian art, the famous Ankh from the British Museum. It is made of faience, and comes from the temple of King Tahark in Hebron, the territory of modern Sudan. Ankh Uas is placed on top of it, and on top of it is the god of millions of years. Remember the back of the throne of Tutankhamun, and all this life, indomitability and power is infinite for those who possess this symbol. Let me reveal a secret. These symbols served as a frieze in this temple and did not encrust the wall of the sanctuary. This is not a mummy frieze. It is a part of the temple architecture. On the sides, there is a separate jed in the lower right corner of the British Museum. On top of it is the great eye that we are going to see now. The upper symbol on the left side is Scarabaeus, which you know. And a very interesting symbol on the bottom left is Thet, a symbol of blood of a male pillar, Jed. And the combination of Jed and Thet means a combination of male and female origin. And since it was associated with the belt that Sid tied around the dead Osiris to bring him back to life, it is associated with the blood that the goddess shed to bring her husband back to life. It is called either the knot of Sid, or the belt of Sid, or the blood of Sid. It was made of red materials. This wonderful amulet from the 15th century BC is also from the British Museum. It is made of red jasper. I will show you another example when it's made of gold, and pay attention here. It is a very small thing. It was given to the goddess. It was also understood as a living creature. In the images of the gods, the lower part of the tet knot often acts as a buckle on the hip band. It is a symbol of a goddess who protects a male deity from any kind of evil. And here is a very beautiful thet made of red jasper from the 15th to 14th centuries BC in the British Museum. The Book of the Dead, verse 156, you have the blood of Uriasis, you have the strength of Uriasis, you have the charms of Uriasis. This amulet is a protection for this great one who will drive away the evil Thet with the red jasper and the juice of the fruit in which life is hidden, wrapped in the cover and placed on the neck of the dead on the day of burial. What is it for? Who is it made for? The strength of the Isis will become the protection for his body, and the choir of the son of Isis will rejoice seeing him. There will be no hidden ways for him to get out of the Book of the Dead. Just to give you a hint of the amount of ritual context around each such amulet, we have instructions on the ritual of certain amulets in the Book of the Dead. There are various funeral texts, and there is also the little known Papyrus MacGregor, which is entirely dedicated to the illumination of amulets. This is also there. And these are amazing, very rare examples of such monuments. Another example is a wonderful shot of the great American photographer Harry Burton, who worked on the excavation of Tottenham's tomb with Carter. This is a wall that closed the passage to the Tsar's burial chamber from the hall. On both sides there's a statue of Tottenham, as you can see. And then there's an incredible beauty, because the outer ark, inside which other arks and sarcophagi of Tottenham are located, is entirely covered by the combination of the signs Jet and Tet. Because apart from the combination of the masculine and feminine beginning, Jet carries the meaning of eternity, Tet carries the meaning of infinity, and together they are read in completely different forms. The combination of symbols, when not just the meanings of the symbols are combined together, but when, on the contrary, when two symbols are joined, they begin to acquire a completely separate, specific meaning. And here's a fragment of the creation from this ark on the left side of the image. Tottenham sits in the centre like God carrying life, the Ankh in his hands. This is the sphere of heaven, inside which his mortal body will acquire all states of immortality and will become a great bright spirit. The Ankh will become the deity that awaits as its companion, the sun deity. The quintessence of all Egyptian amulets is this eye that has appeared many times today. According to legend, when Seth is defeated and Osiris is supposed to be reborn, but the rebirth does not take place, the choir, his son, gives him the highest sacrifice he can make, the eye that Seth snatched from him during the battle. By swallowing this eye, Osiris gets eternal life, because no other magic methods, no means, not even the magical powers of Isis and the Great Charm were able to bring God back so that death would be overcome. This is the spectrum of this eye, which is called Ujat, or the sounding one. You can translate this name. On both sides of the eye, made of lazurite mass and pearl, heraldic cobra vajit, is the ruler of the Delta, the ruler of Lower Egypt, and the Great Nebet, the ruler of Upper Egypt. The eye of the choir can enter into very different forms. The right eye is the sun, the left one is usually the moon. These are the eyes of the eternal God. Or when a snake comes out of the eye that does not have a heraldic symbol, this is a representation of the angry mother goddess as the eye of the sun god. So here is a rich symbolic range from the 3rd millennium BC and up to the last centuries of the existence of the Egyptian culture that is being traced. I'll show you a few examples. This is a symbol of Marseille. I love Marseille today. Gold, 4 all-pervading eyes of the sides of the world. And this central sign, I like it very much. See how the cats are sitting here. Because the cat is a sign of peace, the eye itself bears a meaning of immortality. And the most expensive gift, the main amulet, the Egyptians love to wear it, and the cats bear the meaning of peace and well-being. There is a collection of museums depicting Pushkin's art, the Eye of the Horus, where 64 cats are depicted between the brow and the eye. There are hundreds of thousands of monuments with the image of the Eye of the Horus. You can find them in museums around the world, but one very interesting detail should be noted. The upper frame is a golden plate from the burial of the Queen of Duat, Kad Korkin Utawa, in the 10th century BC. It is a golden plate with a cut on the belly made by a balsamist to remove the insides during balsam. It is a return of integrity to the body. The lower image, the sarcophagus of the 20th century BC, is the Eye of the Dead, which is likened to the primordial deity, which through these eyes can come out as a symbol of sacrifice. The Eye of the Horus is like the Ankh and the Jed. The Uaz is an absolutely living creature, and as another wonderful confirmation, I show you the painting on the wall of the tomb of the Tsar Status Pashidu in the 13th century BC, the great mountain of the west, Osiris. And without going into the context of the ritual of commemorating ancestors, we see a spirit in a cup with 2 red torches, which also have torches. The Horus himself, in the form of a falcon, is present here. According to the legend, when the red torches were lit, the gates between this world and that world opened, and you could see your ancestors and give them your offerings. Sometimes a very popular symbol acquires additional meanings. A fragment of the ceiling of the pronaos in the temples of the Horus in Dendera, the 1st century BC. It will look like a goddess so that its beauty is constantly renewed. In the centre of the eye, the god that was associated with the healing of the Horus in the myth is present here in the pose of adoration, And the deities that walk on the stairs to the eye are the increasing phases of the moon, which end with its full moon. A very similar sign, which was also popular in Egypt. Now there will be no such big concepts. Do not be afraid. Wait a little. This is the sign of Gza. This is a sign of magical protection. This is a genuine sign of Gza of the 21st century BC and the collection of the Metropolitan Museum. It is made of electrum and is decorated with gold. In the form of such a sign, even rescue circles were made for the ancient Egyptians at the turn of the 25th and 24th centuries BC. On the relief from the tomb of the great Vizier Chi from Saqqara, you see a boat. A herd is crossing. There are dangerous crocodiles in the Nile. And that fisherman and shepherd, which is framed in a red circle, on it is woven from a hollow reed, such a conditional rescue circle, it really, due to the hollow reed, kept on the water in the form of such an embankment. In general, all ancient Egyptian amulets are divided into three categories. Sa are amulets, these are objects of magical protection. Mechs are those objects that, for example, are a case with a written text. That is, these are enchanting things. It's like a talisman. An ujar is what is related to health and prosperity. These three gradations they are in the Egyptian texts, with the sign of Sa most often depicted the taut, the great pregnant behemoth with lion paws and a crocodile tail, which was the main protector of the mother, pregnancy and infancy. The magnificent taut from the 7th century BC from the Cairo Museum, the famous taut of Pabasa, is based on these signs of Sa. And if this is a great temple sculpture at the Nicene Museum, then here are the most different amulets, where the enraged taut, the female behemoth, was revered as the fiercest, the most terrible creature that destroys everything like a mother of a child that she wants to offend. So the meaning is quite simple. You don't have to be afraid of her image. And there are many examples of images of the goddess hippopotamus with the sign of Say. I'll give you a few. The reliefs from the temple of the goddess Opit in Karnak. In the swamps of the delta, a choir is born, the name of which is Shamatawi, which you already know. And on the left of him is his mother, Isida. It's not taut, it says there, Isida Hesamut. Isida, mother terrible. This is what Isida was like when she protected her baby. And in her hands, not only a sign of Sa, but also knives with which she is ready to cut everyone who brings any grief to Egypt's magic culture. This is a magic curtain. It was made mainly of ivory, and such curtains framed a bed with a pregnant woman or a pregnant woman in the most difficult moments, because despite very high medicine, infant mortality in ancient times was still high. These are two sides of the same magic curtain from the British Museum. And here in the central part, various forms of the mother goddess are torn, tormented, incinerated, and placed on the part of all those demons, infernal fever, nightmares, vices that can cause any damage to the baby. In the centre is the image of the god of the devil, which is not to be confused with our devils. This is the spirit of the patron of the house, the guard, which will be the final words of my today's story. But what attracts me here and what I want to tell you is that if you look on the left side at this either taut or Esidu Hisamut, she has a crocodile behind her back, which is in some strange form. And usually the crocodile is a dangerous animal, and there are special spells of protection from the crocodile on the Nile. This iconography of the deity gives a reference to quite certain absolutely amazing things. This is a fragment of the ceiling the burial chamber, and the great Esidu Hisamut, behind which the crocodile is seen, is the constellation that includes Tuban, the polar star of the ancient world. This is the great mother of the sky in the quintessence, which protects her son Osiris, as well as every infant whose mother gives birth to. These are absolutely amazing parallels between the heavenly world and the earthly world. And there are even special texts. This is the famous magic papyrus that contains the spells of how such amulets are made. I show you an extremely rare frame. Few people know it. It was found in Fadr al-Medina, in the village of the builders of the royal tombs in the Fives, and was associated with such rituals of making amulets. There could be not only such simple ivory jewels, but also such sculptural ones. This is a jewel of the 21st to 20th centuries BC. It is also protective. These symbols are not only dangerous creatures. After all, the crocodile brought the drowned body of Osiris. Like all other symbols, the crocodile is also ambivalent. That is, it has a double nature. And a very important symbol here is a frog, because a frog in Egyptian culture is a great protection and a symbol of eternal life. As for the fact that the most various dangerous animals of the 14th century BC are the golden ring of Pharaoh Horemheb. This is a royal ring, and this central block of four faces rotates. On the one hand, the throne of Horemheb, and here is a crocodile, a lion, above which is written Neb-Hepesh, the ruler of the active clitoris, that is an active force, and a scorpion, which protects from charms. Therefore, here too the ambivalence of these images is shown quite well. A little bit about the frog. In the 4th millennium BC, a vessel for water in the form of a frog from the British Museum from Breccia was made. The frog was a symbol of the goddess Hecate, patroness of birth, patroness of secret sources of life. The name of the frog and snake is associated with secret chthonic deities who know the primordial source of life. On the reliefs in the temple of Pseudophilus, the goddess Hecate, and with the head of a frog, puts life into the figure of a divine infant who is made from clay on a potter's wheel. There was a sea of amulets with the frog, starting from this beautiful amulet and becoming a very rare item again from Marseille. This is an image of a sacrificial table made of bronze. Here is a baboon of time. In the centre is the figure of a donor, that is the person who orders this thing. In front of him are images of bread and vessels with water that flow from this sacrificial table to the ground. But on the mouth, where the water source is, there is a frog, a sign that these sacrifices will give him eternal life. Two short examples that a completely unexpected creature can be in the Egyptian culture, a part of the Obrigo, a griffin. At the top is just a griffin, but look at the lazarite female with a griffin face. Completely unexpected. The griffin is a symbol of the mother goddess, a symbol of the goddess Mut. In the Royal Museum of Antiquity in Leiden, this amazing monument is kept. Look at how angry the griffin is and how it protects its child, the Egyptian king. In the Egyptian culture, there was a very interesting concept that completely associated the griffin with the mother. How unexpectedly the griffin and the mother. It would seem such an angry bird and a terrible bird devouring a paddle, and suddenly the warmest image of the mother. The fact is that the griffin goes to the dead body, eats the dead flesh, and from the dead flesh gives birth to a live egg. From the dead, which can be, it gives birth to the most alive, which can be This is the principle of motherhood that in its presentation of life can overcome absolutely everything. The famous saying about two griffins tells about this amazing concept of the mother. Therefore, the griffin as a mother can be an amulet, the sealing of the Dendera, and we are only interested in one fragment, the lunar disc from which the spirit drives out the black pig. A pig is a ritually unclean animal in the entire ancient Middle East. It is associated with destruction, with chaos. It is sometimes an animal of Satan. But here's an amulet in the form of a pig, because the goddess of heaven, Nut, is revered as a pig that gives birth to millions of pigs. And all these pigs are stars. This is our future story next week. But as a symbol of fertility, the Heavenly Mother is a pig. And a ritually unclean animal works perfectly as an amulet, which is very common in the Egyptian culture among those who wanted to have many offspring. There are a lot of snake symbols. This is a sun urn. And the symbols of the urn which appear on jewellery, you already understand perfectly. This is a sunbed. This is a pectoral from Tutankhamun's tomb. These are separate amulets of the Cairo Egyptian Museum, which are associated with different hypotheses of the goddesses of snakes, which often acquire a partially anthropomorphic image, but sometimes quite amazing figurines. This thing from the 13th century BC, the upper left corner, is one of the 4 snakes that were placed around the corners of the bedroom. These are snakes that drive away bad dreams. With the categories of the space asleep, the Egyptian culture of amulets and talismans is very seriously associated. Now, this monument is one of many kept in Turin in the Egyptian Museum. The head of the snake is made of sodalite because such an amulet will protect from snake bites, from scorpions. And in another world, this universal amulet, which works here and there, will allow the dead to fight with the snakes of chaos and make him invisible to the terrible gaze of the snake Apop, who fights with the sun god himself. In the image of a snake with a human face, Red Hekau herself was venerated, a great charm, a goddess who personified the power that is filled with crowns and amulets. From the tomb of Tutankhamun, this amazing monument, and it is depicted here in the form of a mother breastfeeding a little Tutankhamun in the Cairo Museum, a monument made of wood, of gold, a very rare image. On the head of Red Hekau, the removal of the star Sirius. Snakes often appeared in the Egyptian culture. I've already said this, so just a couple of pictures so that your panorama is complete. A fragment of a gizmo from the 17th century to the new era, a bronze gizmo, very long, in the form of a developing cobra. This is a gizmo of magical practice, and exactly the same gizmos are held in the hands by the god of magic, Hekau, in whose kingdom we are actually all evening today. The upper left corner is a fragment of the Book of the Dead by the great priestess Nesetona Betisheru, such a beautiful name. And now the figure of a man with 2 such snake gizmos in his hands is depicted in red. It is he who fills his powers in the process of performing the ritual. All these magical objects, including, for example, such amazing images, have come to our time. This is the spirit of Basid, a female guardian spirit found in the tomb of a nameless sorcerer in Thebes. There were sorcerer's scrolls, these gizmos, and here is such an amazing figure of this woman who squeezes gizmos. And the last image that we will not stay with you for a long time, but without which the picture would not be complete, is, of course, the devil. He is very kind. He is very funny. Maybe you can't say it right away from the picture on which his cult statue is depicted from the Bukhara oasis, which is now kept in the Cairo Museum, the 4th century BC. Initially, there was an idea that the mass of these spirits, this is a composite concept, and in different hypostases, the devil acts like the devil of the hut, which in a low dance with a tambourine rushes invisibly around the house, kills by the eye, spoils all the evil spirits, chases away the snakes. Or this is Aha, who's not just a devil but a devil fighter. He's armed with a shield, a sword. He cuts the dirt, cuts with his eye, cuts the bad ideas that came to the house. It's in this image is very close to the Russian concept of the smoke, but more powerful. Because he is associated with oracles, he is the deity that eavesdrops on the conversations of the gods and brings them, including in good dreams, to earth. In addition to the cult image, which was in this temple, in the sanctuary of the god of devils in Bukhara, there are many other images of him. He is the protector of those rooms, sanctuaries, temples, where there were rituals related to how the goddess gives birth to a baby. This is a fragment of the relief, the upper part of the wall from the Monmizi, the birthplace of the Katkur temple in Denderi, the image of the devil. Unfortunately, the monks were beaten in the Middle Ages. Look up for a second. You see a cobra with red heads. This is the same adet that I promised to show you as the angry form of the mother goddess. In Denderi, there are 4 face blocks with the image of a ruddy, beautiful demon, which being placed next to 4 stones of the foundation creates invisible protection for the abode of its mistress. These are incredible, hundreds of thousands of images. I'll just show you a lot of them, and perhaps I'll stop here, only on one monument, which occupies the upper right corner. This is the mask of the devil, a very rare amulet from the collection of the Museum of Condé in Chantilly, a rare collection. I'm interested in the middle register, where the devils of both sexes beat the drum, defending their owner and standing around him in a circle. A very rare image, which does not often appear on amulets. This is on the right, without an aha, from the 1st century BC. This is a Greek-Roman raccoon with a sword and a shield, ready to defeat the spirits. On the left, from Marseille, a baby rattle. There were bronze bells in the holes, and with this rattle they shook the baby and calmed him down with the same sweet sound as the devil himself feeds his little devil with the sweet phoenix of immortality. The phoenix of immortality in ancient Egypt. And here the monkeys crawl around him trying to get this fabulous sweet phoenix. So the story is not simple. The devil and his image are often present on the headbands that were really used. The headband from the British Museum dates back to the 14th to 13th centuries BC. It drives away bad dreams and nightmares of the night. And here's the mask of the devil appearing from the papyrus of Hades, and on the base, squeezing the sign of the dog in the eye of the choir, it brings good dreams to the owner who ordered this headband. In the process of the ritual, the devil becomes a devil pantheos, a triumphant creature whose whole body is covered with eyes. He crosses the boundaries of time, going beyond Ouroboros. And here in Ouroboros, there are dangerous creatures that he attacks with his huge harpoons, which plunge into the world of chaos. There were special underground galleries. They have not been preserved. The devil was the head of the ritual of incubation, the ritual of sacred sleep. In this dream, they often ask for permission from the fleshless because the devil is also connected with erotic magic practice. I will show one example. There are quite a lot of such examples. I think this is art. It can be shown perfectly because having a colossal erotic power, he also carries a life that opposes death. The devil is present on special steles, which are used in temple rituals. Here are 3 types of the same statue. Padamachus priest, 4th century BC, Louvre. Such a statue, completely covered with spells, was poured with water, which absorbed the hecatext, and then this statue, water taken from this statue, was used to heal them. The baby is Horus, which is supported by crocodiles. Legend has it that his mother, Isida, cured him when he was in danger, but the demon, whose mask is present here, is always here. The most significant monument of this kind in the Metropolitan Museum, Stella Mater Nicca, also 4th century BS, is completely a legend about how Isida, the demon and the magic word, saved the baby Horus from snake and scorpion bites, and as a sign of this, they will save everyone who runs to this temple magic practice. Sometimes Isida herself, when her son is completely offended, comes out in an angry form, stomps crocodiles, squeezes snakes and scorpions, and destroys everything that needs to be destroyed in order for motherhood to triumph. Notice how much warmth, care, and various images of the mother are depicted here. On both sides, the image of goddess Isida is on the left. Goddess Hathor is on the right, the great feeder. In the centre, there is an amazing relief, gentle and delicate, depicting Isida feeding her baby and protecting the 12th century BC Egyptian museum in Cairo, because the main story that is so important to us today is protection. I show you the last monument of our conversation today. This is Pothicus, a small dwarf who embodies infancy. Dwarves, like all other cultures of Africa, Egyptians considered to have special magical powers. The monument is unfolded. You understand that it is the same thing. He holds a knife in his hand. He is not as simple a child as it may seem. He is ready for protection. He pushes crocodiles into chaos. On both sides, the image of Isida is on the left, which protects him. On the right, the image of Nephthys, the natural opposite, and on the back there is a huge figure of goddess Maat with a reed feather, which is depicted in the sun disk. After all, this is a child who will be the pledge of a new life on his head from the ships of the new day. Here, for a reason, Maat is the third figure, because Isafet is always nearby. Lure, the magic figure for the turn of the 4th and 3rd centuries BC. This is the world in which this part of the magic story is always present. Without comments, I will show you, concluding my story, several showcases with amulets and images of gods from the collection of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Many thanks to Andre Plaxon for this shooting, which was made last year. I just show you the showcases so that on the one hand you understand that you are very well now familiar with this world, and on the other hand so that you realise how much you do not know, because this is the world in which you need to study typology all your life. Just take a look. Each figure can be disassembled in 30 minutes. Magnificent Sekhmet with a kitten. I could not help but take this picture. There should be cats, you understand, right? In general, a separate showcase with cats. Moreover, this is also a reliquary inside these bronze statues, fragments of mummies of cats. And just the final frame with different images of the goddess Isis. These are rows, thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of monuments of a completely amazing world, which actually spoke about one more thing, which I will show you before we get to the list of literature. Louvre, Stella Artisana, a great artist who was a contemporary of the kings of the 21st century to the new era. I knew the secret of the divine wards, the vision of the rite of worship. I arranged all sorts of rites so that nothing slipped from me. None of them was hidden from me. I am the great mystery, and I see the sun in its image. And I was also an artist. I praise you for your art.